Today and tomorrow, we're going to be looking at the distance formula and the midpoint formula. They are formulas that we use throughout all of geometry. Okay, so it's dealing with, it's called coordinate geometry is what we're looking at. It's dealing with shapes on the coordinate plane. Okay, so we're talking about on the axis, plotting points, and that sort of thing. Okay. All right, so the first formula we're going to learn is the midpoint formula. So what this does for us is if we have a segment graphed on the coordinate plane, we can find the location or the coordinate for the midpoint. All right, so if we know A and B, those endpoints, we can find the location of the midpoint. So to do this, it's really just an average of the x coordinates and an average of the y coordinates. If you think about A and B here going left to right, those are my x coordinates, right? So I'm looking for the middle, which is just the average. And then we do it vertically with the y coordinates. Going from top to bottom dividing by 2, that gives us the middle of the vertical change. So that would be the y coordinates. All right, so it's really just the average of the x's and the average of the y's. So let's do a problem like that. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the formula. All right, so we're finding the average of the x's and average of the y's. I'm going to write out all the steps this time. Honestly, after this first time, I won't do it, and you probably will either. All right, so first one says x of 1 plus x of 2. So I need to add my x's together. So that's going to be 8 plus 12, and I need to divide it by 2. Then I'm going to do the same thing for my y's. So y sub 1 plus y sub 2, that's going to be 4 plus 2, and I need to divide that by 2. So really now all we need to do is simplify. So 8 plus 12 gives me 20. 20 divided by 2 gives me 10. For the y coordinates, 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the coordinate for that midpoint is 10, 3. Questions on that one? It's pretty straightforward. The math isn't complicated, right? Kind of nice. A nice change from last chapter. Okay. All right, so now let's take a different twist on this. It says find the coordinates of the missing endpoint. So this time we're looking for an endpoint, given that S is the midpoint of RT. S is the midpoint of RT. So I want to do a little sketch here, just so we know what we're looking at. It says S is the midpoint of RT. So here's RT, here's S. They give us that T is at -4, 3, and S is at -1, 5. I want to know the values of R, or the coordinates of R. I want to know this X and Y value. I'm going to show you two ways to do this. I'm going to show you the formula way to show you how it's tied in, but then we're going to talk logic for a second. Okay? All right, so keep in mind, with the midpoint formula, they took the average of the x's divided by 2, and they got our midpoint. Right? So they took, in case of the x's, they took x plus a -4. Right? There's the adding my x values together, my x coordinates together. Divided by 2 equals the x coordinate of my midpoint, which is -1. Does that make sense? All right, so now we need to solve this equation. We have to clear my fractions first. So if I multiply both sides by 2, I have x minus 4 equals a -2. Add 4 to both sides, I get 2. Okay, so I got all those values from my x's. My x, added those two together, divided by 2, and I got -1. That's how I could solve for x. Now let's do the same thing for the y's. So my y's, they added together my two y coordinates, divided by 2, and got 5 as the y coordinate for the midpoint. So I would have y plus 3 divided by 2 equals 5. Multiply both sides by 2 to clear my fraction. I have y plus 3 equals 10. Subtract 3, I have y equals 7. Yes? Because I'm clearing my fraction so that 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Is that what you're asking? Is that what you're asking? Are you okay? No. Did I answer your question? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. Did you have a moment where you forgot? Okay. Okay, are you good then? All right, so 2, 7 is our answer. So 2, 7 is the location of that endpoint. All right, so let's talk logic for a second, because I think the logic way is way easier. So let's think about the midpoint is the exact middle, right? If the endpoint is the exact middle, look at the axis. It went from -4 to -1. Is that an increase or a decrease? An increase of how much? 3. It increased by 3. So if it's the exact middle, it's going to need to increase by 3 again. So what is -1 plus 3? 2. Okay, so now let's do the y's. It went from 3 to 5. So what is that? Increase or decrease? Increase of 2, which means it's going to need to increase again. So if it increases by 2 again, we get 5 plus 2 is 7. We get the 0.27 again, which is what we got down here. Right, with the formulas, logic is way faster, I feel like. But I wanted you to understand like how it ties into the formula. And I'm not doing something completely different, just trying to think about it logically. Is that okay? Questions on that? All right. The next thing I want to talk about is the distance formula. So the distance formula allows us to find the length of a segment graphed on the coordinate plane. Okay, this is the formula here. D equals the square root of the quantity of x2 minus x sub 1 squared plus the quantity of y sub 2 minus y sub 1, that quantity squared. Okay, so I know it's kind of ugly. Once you use it a couple times, it's not a big deal. And we're going to talk about what all those things mean. But the x and the y come from your 2 points. So for instance, this could be x sub 1, y sub 1. And then this point would be x sub 2, y sub 2. Is that okay? So it's the x and the y is from one point, the x and y is from the second point. So let's give it a try. I'm going to go ahead and write our distance formula up here for us.
I'm allowed to come out.
You're allowed to go back?
Yep.
Okay.
I just put another room to get back to my general talk.
You can't talk right now?
If you couldn't tell.
Yeah, I can tell. Are you okay?
Yeah, I just don't really have my own else call. Because I just gotta take a test. I know. It is very helpful.
Yes, okay. Do you want to,
Xander, say chubby bunny.
Xander, were you going to take your test right now?
Oh yeah.
Are you okay to take your test?
Yeah,
Do you want to do it tomorrow?
I'm pretty sure I can do it now.
Okay.
I just laid out for it now. It's funny to get this off. Can you understand what I'm saying?
I do. Come on in here.
What's the difference?
Yeah.
It's stuck in my music. I know.
All right. Of course I did. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is plug values in. So keep in mind, this would be x sub 1, y sub 1. This one could be x sub 2, y sub 2. Okay, so let's plug in values. We have d equals the square root of x sub 2. So my second x would be -4 minus x sub 1, which would be 1, squared plus, I'm sorry, I think my y. Sorry. My x sub 2 is 5 minus 1 squared is 4. Xander did better than I am right now. Here we go. Squared plus, now let's do our y. So I have -4 minus a -7. That quantity squared. Okay, so this is a lot like slope. Remember how in slope we were subtracting your y values or subtracting your x values? Sometimes you get that double negative you got to watch for. All right, so now let's see what we have. So 5 minus 1 is 4. So we have the quantity of 4 squared plus, this really becomes plus a positive, so I get -4 plus 7 is 3. So the quantity of 3 squared. Now we can simplify. 4 squared is 16, 3 squared is 9. 16 plus 9 is square root of 25. So what's the square root of 25? 5. All right, so for this one is nice, right? That was a perfect square. We can do that one. For now, I'm going to allow you to round it to the nearest 10. Okay, all of your homework, if it's not a nice radical, is just going to be rounded to the nearest 10. Later on in the year, we will do simplifying radicals and all that because it'll serve a purpose for us at that point. So at this point, you just round to the nearest 10. All right, so what I want you to do now is try the second one. Now you try the second one on your own.
Oh, wait. I didn't see. Oh. Maybe I'm going
You want song from
well, I don't even know that.
oh, song. What's your song?
I hate it. Yeah. I thought the boy was so like,
The little
yeah.
that's true.
Yes.
Have you
Yeah. I really like this girl.
All right, let's look at what you have. Let's look at what you have. So I'll set it up and then I'll start simplifying a little bit in my head. So I have the square root of the quantity of 4 minus a -3, that's squared, plus, now my y's, I have -2 minus 0, that quantity squared. Okay, so 4 minus a -3 would give me 7. 7 squared is 49. Then -2 squared is going to be a +4. Be careful of that, right? Because it's the quantity of -2 squared. So that should be 4. So then we get the square root of 53. Not a nice number. What does that round to? 7.2 or 3? 7.3. So that's approximately 7.3 units long. Okay, so now be careful of that squaring a negative number. But keep in mind, this is a distance, right? It's like if I could lay a ruler on the graph. So if you get a negative number underneath your radical, that means it's an imaginary number. We don't have imaginary numbers on rulers. Right? This is geometry. All right. Questions on the distance formula? Okay, last thing, I wanted to show you where the distance formula comes from. Okay, I'm not going to ask this on a test or a quiz, but I kind of want to make some connections for you. All right, so in this case here, I'm really trying to find the length of AB. Okay, I'm trying to find the length of this segment AB. I've drawn in a horizontal piece and a vertical piece because I was trying to make a right triangle. Because the distance formula is actually based on Pythagorean theorem that says a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? All right, so in Pythagorean theorem, we know that c has to be my hypotenuse. All right, so this is side c. My other two are going to be side a and side b. So what we need to think about, because I do have a triangle graphed on a grid, but I don't have exact numbers. So I assign them variables. So I have x sub 1 and y sub 1 for point B here. To go over to point C, what we can call C, notice my x values are going to change because it's moving horizontally, but it's not changing vertically, so it's still a y sub 1. Does that make sense? My y value didn't change there? Okay, now let's think about point A. A is going to have the same x coordinate as C, but the y value would have changed. So that's going to be y sub 2. Is that idea okay? All right, so this is called coordinate geometry, like when we start putting in these substitute coordinates instead of actual numbers. So let's think about how can I find the length of side A using these coordinates that I have? What if this was graphed on a grid and this number, this x sub 2 was 20 and this was 8? How could I find the length of this horizontal piece without having to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like count all the grid lines? If this is 20 and this is 8, what can I do? I can subtract them, right? So I could call this side x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Right? Whatever the biggest coordinate is minus the smallest coordinate. Let's think about that then for the y values. For this vertical side here, I can do the same thing for my y's, right? Take the largest y value, subtract the smallest. So y2 minus y1 would give me the length of side B. Is that idea okay? So let's plug that into the Pythagorean theorem. So c squared is still there, c squared equals, instead of a, I can express it as x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So I have the quantity of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus, now I can think about side B. B can be expressed as y sub 2 minus y sub 1. No, see it? All right, so I plug that in, but I need to get c all by itself. So right now I have a c squared. How can I undo my c squared? Take my square root. So we have the square root of the quantity of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus quantity of y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. But since we are really just finding the distance, we change that c to a d. So it's just the distance formula. Okay, so there, I'm just trying to make some connection with your algebra, with some geometry that you know, and how it all comes together. All right, so your homework is on Delta Math. There are 3 types of problems. There's distance formula problems, so you're rounding to the nearest tenth. There's some midpoint problems. Make sure you put your answer in parentheses because it is a coordinate point, right? And then there's a couple of endpoint problems where they give you a midpoint and an endpoint, and you're trying to find the other endpoint. Good? Okay, go to it. Let me know if I can help you. Good night.